Uh, so we'll be starting in next 2 minutes. Starting in 2 minutes. Mm. Let me get my water. So you also get your water bottles ready with you. So this is going to be a quite long session. I try to finish it as soon as possible, but let's see how it goes. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Hello, all, am I audible? Am I audible and visible? Everyone, please do respond in chat. Please do respond in chat. Am I audible and visible? Yeah. I think I need to make this visible. Please. Am I audible and visible? Please do respond. We'll start our session. Let's open this notes.mt. So we'll start our session. Everyone, please tell me go ahead. I'll just go ahead and I'll just start my session. So, yes, I'll explain it. First, we'll see about React Redux principles. Then we'll go ahead and we'll see the overview of this thing, and we'll see what are the implications that we do in this given particular session. So, in this given particular session, we try to just focus upon the React. How can we make asynchronous Redux component kind of a thing using very simple example. And in tomorrow's, we implement some changes and we'll then deploy it. That's it. That's it for this sprint. Tomorrow, by tomorrow is we are only doing that thing. Go ahead. Fine. So in the previous session, we have learned about this one thing, like about the Redux and what are the different components of the Redux. But I just forgot to speak about this particular principles of Redux. What are the principles that core principles that Redux actually follows? So one of this principle that Redux follows is that it is single source of truth. Like it should be the single source of truth, where we can only have one store in whole application. In whole application, but we can have, let's say, we can have multiple slices, multiple slices. Similarly, the second principle is that state is read only, which is nothing but when you want, sorry, I can say when you want to update the state, when you want to update the state, then I think that yeah, then we have to dispatch an action or dispatch a action event. You show what is meant by this action event. Yesterday you have already seen, but I just repeat the things. Don't worry about it. So we have to dispatch an action. This is a very crucial point. On object that describes what happened. The other thing is changes, or the last principle that Redux actually follows is changes are made by pure functions. By pure functions, which is nothing but I can say that yeah, I'll take this example. This is nothing but I'll say to specify how to change a state, action is passed, or else I'll say state, I'll say action, or action is passed to the reducer function, which is nothing but, I'll just tell you what is meant by pure function with a simple example, where I'll say in the source I'll create this one file known as pure.js. Let's try to see what is meant by pure function and impure functions, which I'll say that impure function where I can say that they will not give same result for same input. This is one key point, and the second key point is it will input from outer scope, which is nothing but, let's say I'll try to write a simple function. I'll say let y is actually equal to the value of 10, and I'll say function fn, inside of it I'll say y actually equal to the value of 2 multiplied by y, and x actually equal to the value of x multiplied of y. Oh, sorry, not double x, single x multiplied by y. And I say console.log x comma y. So this is what I'll say. I'll call this function for 5, 2 value, where I'll say, so in this particular thing I'll say cd redux, and I say node pure.js, run the code. Okay. Where I'll say this as C. Now I need to run the code. Node pure.js. Okay, it's exactly showing me that. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I'll say that, okay, I should pass x value. I should pass an x value, where I'll say node pure.js. Now if you observe this given particular function, where for the same input, see, I am not actually changing this given particular input. For the same input, you see, for the input of 5 and input of 2, you see these x and y values are continuously being changed. And also if you observe, the y value here in this given computation is actually taken care by this particular y outer scope variable. So x is only that is related to this given function. Only x is that is related to this given function. And if you observe this given particular code, this y is actually taken from outer scope. So this is actually known as an impure function. But now let's try to understand what is meant by this particular pure function, where I'll say they give same output. They give same output for same input, which is like, let's take this example where we have a function where it accepts x. It is nothing but x square plus 2. So if we say if x is actually equal to the value of 4, then this fn of this 4 is actually equal to 4 square plus 2. So this yields the value of 16 plus 2. So it is 18. So whenever you give the value of this particular 4 for this given simple function, where x square plus 2, every time the result will yield the value of 18. So this is actually a pure function. Actually, this is a high level definition of pure function. So where the other difference is, where I'll say that all its variables, to be more precise, doesn't have, or I can say doesn't changes any outer variable. Which is nothing but that doesn't produce any kind of a side effect. So, which is nothing but even your Redux, one of the main principles that changes are only made by the pure functions, so that there will be no such kind of a side effects thing for your application. So your function might not interrupt into some other component and will not disturb any kind of a thing. Those things will not be occurred in this particular Redux. So these are the primary three functions or three principles of any given Redux application. So if someone asks you in the interview, because I've heard for one of my friends interview, he told me that they have asked about this particular thing known as what are the principles of Redux. So he actually told one of them correctly, but two of them he told wrong. So, but yes, be careful. Any which way, he got the job at that point of time. But be careful when someone says about what are the principles of the Redux. You just tell them that this and this and this and this. Oh yeah. Now we are at this point. So let's go back to this thing. Let's say, okay, let's do this one simple thing. For this given normal counter, I create a file named as user.jsx. So for which I have this one simple thing, I'll say import, or sorry, RFC, where we have this user component altogether here itself, and in which I'll say let's get user details. npm what is this thing? Rundev. npm rundev. This thing is actually happening and we are actually running the application itself, so don't worry about it. We have the counter, chill. Okay, fine. Just need to change a few values. Instead, go to this store, go to this counter size. That would be a thing. So where I just want to comment this thing down. I just want to remove it. So for which I'll be telling this entire thing. Now don't worry about it. Now we have this user thing. If you run the code, now let's say JSON placeholder. Let's say I just want to have, or the details about which I just want to show the details of this user. We have 10 users data, where in which I'll say /1. We are getting the user 1 data. So I'll copy it. Now my main agenda is that I just want to showcase those user details onto the screen using this simple component. So for which I do require I'll say import, or wait, I'll say I just want this particular thing known as let's say use state. Use state is one such a thing, where if you observe in this given example, let's try to write the code. I'll say that const user comma set user, where I'll say use state is actually equal to the value of null. Initially the value of user is actually. Similarly, I'll say every time I just want to showcase any kind of users, the general practice I perform is that I'll say this set I'll say use state null, and I'll say this particular thing loading of set loading. I'll say use state value is, let's keep the values of true, and let's keep this value as false. These are the three state parameters that I just want to have a track on whenever I just want to render any kind of user details onto the screen. So this is the basic thing that I just do. So I'll say that const heading is actually where I'll say user example, and inside this given particular thing, or else I try to write it here itself. So if the loading thing is actually happening, then I just want to return the simple thing. I just want to return where I can say, or else I just want to return two components. So in this space I just want to call this one single thing of heading, and I just want to also call this h3 event or h3 thing where I'll say loading data is getting loaded. So if any kind of an error happens, then I simply say return this thing as heading, here I'll say there is this error. I just want to showcase these elements onto the screen when the things actually happen in this given way. But if the data actually arrives onto my screen, I simply say that this one thing heading is one such a thing, and second one is h4 the things where I'll say name is actually equal to the value of user dot name. The other one I just want to get the value is h4 I'll say phone. So it is nothing but I'm just arranging the elements so that once the data comes, it's very easy for me to handle the data all by myself. So now my entire structure is done. Now how can I make an API call to it? So we all know that we have this one thing known as use effect. So I'll be using that same use effect thing. So we already have this use effect. We know how this use effect actually works because we have already seen a lot of things about this given particular use effect. So for which I'll say okay, let's try to write it. I'll create a function inside which I actually have this async function. Yeah, I use this try catch block. I just want the element need to be trying this particular catch block, which is nothing but what's the code I can write. So let's say set loading. This particular loading thing value is as value of true. Then I'll say const response is actually await fetch this particular thing, and const user is is actually await data response dot JSON. So once we catch, so I'll write it. Once you get the response, I just want to say it set loading value as false initially until the data arrives. I just want to keep this loading value as true. Then once the data received, then I'll say false, and I'll say finally that set user state component with this one thing known as user. Once there is this error, like any kind of an error that happens, I'll simply say so here error is nothing but error. So yeah, I'll say set error value is actually equal to the value of true, and I'll say set loading value is actually equal to the value of false. So these are the things that I just want to say, and also I just want this use effect to run only for one time. So that's why I keep this particular which is nothing but once there is initial render, I just want this use effect function will be called for once, and then we need to actually run the code. Then we need to actually run this entire code. So that's all I want. So I'll just call here and here itself. So now let's check. Okay, wait, this is user.jsx. Where is this app.jsx? Then instead I'll say this this user. So I'll say implement it. Now check it. Let's try to keep this entire thing calm for few minutes. Let them keep for calm for few minutes. Yes, initially if you observe, I'm just for a blink second, you will see that there is a page is actually loading. Once the data actually receives the given page, it is actually showing that the user details are actually there. Let's say if there is any kind of an error here, let's say instead of placeholder, I'll say I'll remove it and see. You'll see that error is actually showing. Reload it, you'll see initially there is small reload happens and then error shows because there is error. So if I set right the back things, reload the code, you'll see I'm getting the data from the backend, from the REST API. So this is the thing that we all know, right? At this point of time, anyone has any kind of a doubt on how to get a data from the backend or any given API? Is my audio clear now? Is my audio clear? Is my audio clear now? Please respond in chat and till anyone has any kind of a doubt till this particular point. Can I go ahead? Can I go ahead? No, it's good. Yeah. Here itself. Now there is this one important thing I just want to tell you is nothing but it is the data is of Redux toolkit. So for which we go to this Redux toolkit. Sorry, I think Redux dev tools. Sorry, it's not Redux toolkit. Redux dev tools. There is this Chrome extension for Redux thing. Click on this add to Chrome, add extension. So this dev tools for Redux is actually very much useful. So I'll close it. So now let's go back to this point of where I have this thing, which is nothing but, as we have already seen this example of store. Whenever you want to go to the store and get something, we just go to this owner and ask whatever we want. He just go back and he'll get it. Similarly, in the given store is actually divided into multiple items or multiple sections. So kitchen items are actually placed in kitchen section, beauty products are kept in beauty products, eatables are placed in eatable section, medicines are placed in medicine section, right? Whenever we ask anything regarding eatables like Maggi or Kurkure, or not just go to that section, bring the things back. Similarly, here we are actually storing this, I can say, we are actually storing a count variable. To be more precise, yes, we are actually storing a count state variable whose value is actually equal to the value of 0, right? I can say this. Now we have this one single variable count inside this given particular section slice, where the slice or this any given item in the store or any given section in the store will have their own what I can say, have their own section items or have their own section names, like kitchen items and beauty products. These are the section names, right? Similarly, our particular what I can say, similarly our particular store, we are actually creating the slice item. First we are creating a section part in the Redux part, and after creating that slice, where inside that slice we mentioned two important things. One is what is the name of that given particular section or the slice. So here the name I have given is counter slice. Similarly, the second thing is, here I have given a variable, or I have stored a state variable inside this count variable, inside this slice. Now after defining this given slice, we actually keep this slice inside this store. Once we actually keep this store, we actually send this given state variable count in the form of provider to the app part, to the app.jsx part. So if we want this state variable, it is actually present with app.jsx component. So we use this useSelector component and get it from app to our component. This is our component. To be more precise, I'll say delete it. I'll say React component. Let's make it bigger. This is nothing but your React component. Whenever your React component needs this state variable, we use this hook known as useSelector, which is actually given by this Redux itself. So once this useSelector gives us this given particular state variable, then we try to, if we want to have any kind of manipulations or anything of actions that we need to perform in order to manipulate or change this given particular state variable, we use this dispatch hook, dispatch hook given by this React Redux, where in this dispatch hook we have action functions. We have this action function, where this action function helps us to navigate from this point to till your slice point and helps us to manipulate your particular I can say state variable that is present in initial state. Even your slice has, to be more precise, even your slice also have some kind of an actionable items that can be performed on the state variable. So this is the entire life cycle or entire working cycle of Redux. Anyone has any kind of a doubt till this point? Anyone has any kind of a doubt till this point? Yes, today we are going to see what is meant by thunk. Don't worry about it. Now see, we are going to learn about thunk. How do we use thunk and what is the use of thunk? We will see about it. Don't worry about it. So till anyone has any kind of a doubt at this point, the entire life cycle of this entire life cycle of this Redux. Once you are clear with, then we'll see how can we make an asynchronous call to the Redux. Because here we have our slice. If we have observe this counter slice, where we have our reducers which can perform actions on the state variable, given particular state variable. But if you observe this particular slice, where this count is one such a state variable that is exactly present in the slice element itself, But in the case of this condition, in the case of this user.jsx, I am actually setting up the state. Onto the screen from getting some API thing. So I am here making an asynchronous call to this to get the data from this given link, and I am actually updating the state. But here if you observe, we have already a count of state variable that is exactly present in the slice itself. But in this given example, in order to get data from some server, I am actually making a fetch call here. Now, how can we actually utilize this state management for these asynchronous operations? This is a very crucial and super important detail. That we must understand, because everything that we apply in this particular Redux in real life things, we deal with asynchronous things. So we must understand how we'll be able to do it. So if you have no doubts, can I go ahead, everyone? Can I go ahead? Please do respond. Can I go ahead? Let's see how can we store a particular data using asynchronous Redux. Go. Fine. So in order to implement that thing, let's try to understand this theoretical part, because once if you understood this theoretical thing entirely, then instead I'll call it like this. Let's get this entire data. let's try to understand how can we make asynchronous call, which is nothing but, if you observe this entire cycle of this redux, we're actually storing state variable here inside this count, inside this given slice, and we are actually taking that slice and storing it in user in the store item. After that, we are having this provider thing to this app.jsx. In order to get this state variable from the app, we used to use this OS selector, and whenever we want to implement any kind of an actions onto this particular state variable, we use this thing known as a dispatch hook, and we actually directly communicate to the slice itself. So this is the entire chain of process. If we have the state variable inside the slice, but if you observe this given example, the state variable user, here if you observe this user, the state variable user is getting the data from an asynchronous call. It is getting the data from some other API. It is getting from this given particular server. There is some data, we are getting the data here, and we are actually storing it in state variable. So this is entirely a different ball game altogether. Now, how can we make asynchronous call to get data, and we can actually use Redux to manipulate and store the state itself? That's an interesting part, which is nothing but, here we know that we actually make dispatch call in order to perform any kind of an actions. In yesterday's session, in order to increment, I'll go to this counter slice again. In order to increment this given state variable count, I have these functions, and if you observe this code, I'll just go to my counter Redux. Whenever there is this increment, I'm actually using dispatch to increment the things. So dispatch actually gives us this particular action object, where inside the action object we have, where is this counter slice? I'll keep it here. Whenever we use this thing known as a dispatch, it actually provides us the action object, where that action object has all of these things, all of the actions that can be performed on it. So whenever I call such kind of actions.increment, then this eventually directed to this particular thing, then this particular increment will be called. Increment function will be called. Similarly, if I do this same thing of decrement, it actually happens with the decrement thing. So this is entire life cycle. But here in this given example, we actually create we don't directly talk to this particular element. We don't directly talk to this slice element directly, but there is this one interesting thing, which is nothing but, here we have a middleware itself. We have this one thing known as middleware. This is actually known as middleware, where we actually send a dispatch call to this middleware. This dispatch call to this middleware. So this is actually known as middleware. Now, the responsibility for this middleware is that it should go and contact the API that is exactly storing here. Storing somewhere else, it should go and it should talk, okay, API. Which is nothing but, in this example of user.jsx, we are actually dealing the component where user component is actually directly dealing with this particular thing known as, that separate API from a given server and getting the data from there. But when you use the Redux to manage the state for these asynchronous operations, we actually go and perform this particular operation where we go to this middleware. Actually, we create the middleware. Don't worry, we'll see how can we create a middleware itself. Once we create the middleware, and the middleware actually goes and asks the API, see, I just want data from this given particular link of this particular user one, how can I get it? Now, API will respond back to this middleware. Then once this middleware got the response, it actually contact your slice element. So if you observe this, both the above things, here this is how the synchronous Redux state management actually happens, but here asynchronous state management happens here. So we just call this use dispatch function in order to manipulate any kind of things of the state variable. We just talk to the middleware and ask it, okay, middleware, just bring me the data from API. Middleware will take all the headache. And will go to API, will fetch the data, and will get it back to your slice. So till at this point of time, anyone has any kind of a doubt? because whatever thing that I have shown in the diagram, it is the exact thing that we are going to replicate it now. Please do respond to chat if you have any kind of a doubt. Anyone has any kind of a doubt? No doubts. Continue. Yeah, fine. Please explain it again. Which part you want me to explain, Vamsi? I mean, the Mahesh. Which part you want me to explain? Which part you want me to explain? Middleware function part. Middleware is nothing but whenever after from app application, app.jsx, whenever we got these state variables to us, we just, if we want to perform any kind of an operation, we actually ask the middleware, see, I just want that thing, bring me. Middleware goes to this API part, which is nothing but API is nothing but this particular link, and will get the data for you, and will go to the slice part to update the things, because in the slice only we have our state variable. So middleware will actually take, but here in normal example, this user function is actually asking this given particular link, I just need data of user one. I just need the data of user one. Then this is actually providing us. But middleware in the Redux thing, if you just talk to middleware, ask middleware, see, there is this link, go to there and bring me some data. Middleware will go, will bring the data and will update the state. It will take all the headache. It will take all the headache. So anyone has any kind of a doubt? Till this point? Got it. Yes, we'll go ahead. Now for that, in order to implement this thing, let's try to see how can we implement them. Itself. So for which, I just go to my Redux thing. First, the first part in this entire slide is create the section for the user. So for which I'll say I'll create user slice.jsx. So rfce. Now after creating this user slice, where I have this, where my counter slice, I just copy this entire thing, or else I write it again. Don't worry, I'll write it again. User slice, where I'll say, okay, it's not rfce, where I just want to say import. I'll say just get this particular thing which can create a slice. Create slice from Redux toolkit. So here one important thing is nothing but Redux is the core part. Where outer to it we have this Redux toolkit. So this Redux toolkit will all give its functions, will all give methods, will all give properties, will all give objects. But the core heart around this Redux toolkit is nothing but your Redux. That's why when you are installing the Redux, you install npm install Redux space Redux.js dash or slash toolkit, because Redux is the heart, outer body is actually this toolkit. So both are required in order to work with the Redux. So now I'll say user user slice, where I'll say create slice, in which I'll say this first thing is nothing but user slice, or else user slice. Once we create this user slice, we initialize this given state. So what is this initial state? So if you go to this user.js, we have these three important states: user, error, and loading. So I just tell the same values. User value is by default null value. Loading is actually by default true value, and error value is a state variable. All these three are state variables, but by the way, don't worry about it. By having the false values, after this we actually say so wait, sorry, we have this particular given different things, right? Given different things, given different altogether a set of things where, oh sorry, where I'll say in the form of reducers, like what are the actions that I just want to perform on these above state variables is that first action is user loading. So I just want to perform this given action on this particular state, where I'll simply say that state, whenever this is loading actually happens onto the screen, I just want to say state.error value to be actually equal to the value of false, and state.loading value is actually equal to the value of true. So these are the things that I just want to perform when someone calls this particular user loading method in order to manipulate this particular state variable itself. So clearly here user loading is nothing but, if you see here, it is kind of a set loading. It is kind of a set loading. So React has given us this particular set loading function all by default, but here in Redux we actually need to define these kind of functions, where these functions actually manipulate these state variables. So that's why I'm doing it, and I have use error, where I'll say state, where I'll say state dot error is actually equal to the value of true, and I'll say state dot loading is actually equal to false. When there is an error, I just don't want my loading variable, state variable, to have the value of true. I just want to make it false. Now coming to this final part, what is about this user state? This is what I'll say use data. Whenever we call this use data thing, we actually have this particular thing, where I'll say that these particular use data, whenever this is called to manipulate this user variable, I'll say state dot load is actually the value of false, actually equal to the value of false. But coming to this state dot user, then here the user thing initially the value is actually null, but here there is this one item, I'll say action dot payload. So I'll tell you, which is nothing but for any given function that used to manipulate state in Redux, along with the state we actually pass a parameter known as payload. Sorry, not its payload, it's action. Sorry, it's not payload, by the way, action. So which is nothing but I just want to perform this action. To change the state variable. Here the state is nothing but your user. So I just perform this action. Let's say if I click on this particular data, I just want to render the data onto the screen, which is nothing but initially the user, which is helpful to render the data onto the screen, is actually equal to the value of null. But once if I call this particular function to change or to update this given particular state variable user, then I just want two things to be happen, which is nothing but an action should happen. So what action is nothing but I just want the data that to be just kept inside this particular user variable, which is nothing but the action part is we are getting data from some API, and we need to store them. Instead of null, we need to store the data inside this user. So for that we require this thing known as action.payload. So one simple thing is that whenever you are doing any kind of a thing, whenever you are doing any kind of an action, or specifically not changing the state variable, not changing the state variable, if you observe this here, loading and error, for both of them we are actually changing their values directly. But whenever you want to perform certain actions, like in this example where user directly or the state variable user has the initial values as null, but whenever I make a API call and if I get the data from that backend, I just want to store it inside it and I just want to showcase it onto it. Two items, store it inside it and showcase it onto the screen. That's why I have told this particular thing state.user. Whenever this particular use data function actually happens to modify this particular user data, then I'll say action.payload, which is nothing but whatever action is happening This is nothing but we are actually going to the backend and getting the data and storing it and showcasing it onto the screen. So this entire thing need to be happened. That's why I have chosen this simple thing. So this action is an object that is actually given by this Redux itself. So I'm utilizing it. So whatever action that happens, and the payload inside that action, I just want to store on this given user state variable. So this is what it is meant by action and using it on payload. So anyone has any kind of a doubt in this point? It is nothing but we are actually making sure instead of storing it and showcasing it, I am doing both of the things at same time. Because the action is go to the server, get the data, store it and showcase it. Three phases. But here using this action.payload, I am actually, the data which I am getting from API, I am just storing it and showcasing it onto the screen. So these two things will go for one shot. That's what I meant by action.payload. Anyone has any kind of a doubt? Without changing the state. No, here the state will change. Here state will change, but the one important thing, Viral Bank, you need to understand is that we are performing some actions to get the data and store it inside this user state variable. We are performing some action. What is that action? Going to that particular server and getting the data and storing it onto this particular state variable. So that is actually known as action. But for every action, there is some content inside it. We are going and getting the data. So the data is actually known as payload. So the action is going there and picking up the thing. And coming back. That is the action. So inside that action, there is this some data that it is getting us back. So that is actually known as this payload thing. That's why I've directly told that action.payload. Whatever action you go and bring the data and you bought the data back, right? I just want that data. So I am telling that action.payload. The action which you have did, by which way when you are coming back, you are getting some data, which is actually known as the payload. I just want that to be stored inside this user state variable. That's why I have written this action.payload. Anyone has any kind of a doubt? Vamsi, I'm actually focusing on this slice part because in slice part we have the access to this given particular state variables itself. Here only we have the state variables. For that we are actually writing functions like what things that need to be changed and sort of stuff. What things that we need to be changed, that sort of stuff. We're actually dealing it here. We're actually dealing with it here. So once if in slice you have state variables, in order to manipulate these state variables, we have these reducers and make sure the one single important thing is in the given reducers whatever things that you have mentioned should be restricted to this slice part only. Now I'll simply say go down, I'll say export default this particular user slice. User slice is different, sorry. This thing I need to export it. So I'll say this is u is smaller, okay. But let's make the change here itself. User slice. Use thing and yes, this thing. Now this thing works. Now we have created the first part, which is nothing but the slice part. This part though I am done with it. Now coming to the second thing. I'll say inside this Redux I'll create one file. I'll say user redux.jsx. If you observe user redux.jsx, or I can say instead of here inside this redux component I'll create it. So user redux.jsx. So whatever content here that is exactly present, I'll copy it I'll paste it and I'll say user redux. Come up, we have this thing known as redux, user redux. So this is the one simple thing that I have did. So now close this user .jsx at this point of time. Now I can say that okay, let's make changes in this thing. So the first thing is we know that in order to make any dispatch thing from the component, we need a middleware. So for that middleware, I create a one single middleware element itself, where I'll create inside this Redux. Let me create a folder middleware, and inside of it I'll say user middleware.js. Now inside this given middleware, I just go to this given code, because if you observe this entire diagram, this middleware is actually responsible to get the data from API, which is nothing but in the given code, this is actually getting the data for us. This entire, I can say this use effect, to be more precise, this entire use effect is actually useful to get the data from this given API and showcase it onto the screen. So I'll cut it, I'll say paste it. I'll paste it in this particular user middleware.js, because this middleware is now responsible to actually get the data from this given particular thing, so for which I'll say I need to make few changes. So for which I'll comment it and I'll say I'll say import user slice. I think user slice. Import this user slice from this given particular thing, and after that I'll say export const. I can say this fetch user middle where. So I'll say this is an async thing, that actually it returns an async thing, where this middleware by default has this particular thing known as a dispatch function. So it is actually provided by this Redux thing. So wait, yeah, now this is correct. Now it is nothing but we are now trying to create this actual middleware part, where I'll say we have already this code, right? Where we have already this code, where I'll say this, copy this entire till the catch part. We have already written this code, so we use the same code here. Okay. So we have this entire code with us. This is the try part. Where instead of set loading, these particular things are in the present of user slice. So here, if you go to this middleware, in order to set this particular loading state true, I just say I just call this particular thing. How to call this particular thing? This is actually present inside this slice. So whenever we need to communicate, we actually use this thing known as a dispatch function. So for which I'll simply say, go to this middleware.js. Instead of this particular thing, I'll first import use dispatch from React Redux, because use dispatch is actually given by the Redux, where this dispatch actually gives us this actions. Yesterday we have seen actions object or action object. I'll say dispatch, or I'll say, I can say, wait, not dispatch, but it's a user slice dot actions. I get this user slices dot actions. So now instead of that, I'll simply say dispatch action dot user loading. So because this action part will consist of all the reducers that are exactly present here. This entire reducers, which is nothing but the action part. We are actually, the major use of functions in JavaScript is nothing but they actually use to perform actions. So that's why whatever thing that is present inside this reducer is nothing but an actionable is nothing but an actionable item. So from that slice, how can we communicate to that given slice? How can we communicate this given slice is nothing but using this thing is use dispatch. So even your middleware need to communicate this particular slice to the slice using this particular thing known as use dispatch. So that's why I'm just using it in the code itself. In the code itself, in the code itself, I'm actually getting this thing. Okay, now this particular thing, I'll remove these two things. I'll remove this loading thing. By the way, I'll remove this loading thing. And if you observe, in order to call this, in order to store this given particular data that is actually came from the backend to this user element, into this given user element, into this user state variable, I need to call this given particular function. So which is nothing but, in order to call a function that is exactly present inside the reducer of a slice, I'll use dispatch. I'll say action dot use data. So once we call this use data function, then automatically what happens? This load value or this particular loading thing, not load, it's loading, by the way. This loading value, the state variable, will actually go to the files of value of the false, and we actually showcase the output onto the screen. And finally, if you observe, in this user.jsx, instead of this particular thing, instead of calling both of them, set error and set loading, here in slice itself, we have this one method, set error, use error. This is the function. So I'm just calling using dispatch. I'll say dispatch because that is exactly present inside this slicer. So I have only a dispatch function that can communicate to the slice itself. So I'll use dispatch and I'll say action dot use error function. Action dot use function. Use function. I just remove this thing. Use dispatch from React and Redux. But any changes of code? Nothing. So this is how we have written our particular code. We have written our particular middleware. So this middleware now has the ability to just call the state changes that initially when this particular asking about from component to this particular I just want data, middleware first actually perform this load option where the loading part will be appeared onto the screen, because if you go to this user loading in this slice, so we are telling that the state loading value is actually true, which is nothing but there is this thing known as dot loading will actually happen. Now after that, once we make this call successful, we are just using that thing onto the screen itself using this use data thing. So go to use this thing. We have this use data where at that point of time, once we receive the data, then we are going to make this loading state variable value as false and this user variable as action payable value thing. So give me a minute. I'm getting a call. I just need to attend it. Sorry for this thing. Let's get back. So this is the thing. Anyone has any kind of a doubt till this point, creating this user middleware and sort of stuff? Anyone has any kind of a doubt? Because if you understood this, how to create this middleware part, all the things what we have did yesterday, we just do the same thing here. Even for this middleware also, we just copy pasted the code and changes, and To update the state, we use dispatch call, because that also we have learned yesterday. To update the state, we actually, from React component, we actually need to talk to that section itself, slice itself. For that we use dispatch. I've used the same thing. Nothing much more than that. Nothing much more than that. Anyone has any kind of doubt till this point? Please do respond. Any kind of issues? No? Can we go ahead? Please do respond in chat. Can you go ahead? Can you go ahead, Viral Bank? Can we go ahead? Can we go ahead? Are the people actually present in the session? Thanks. Anyone has any kind of no doubts. Good. So go to this your thing. We have everything working fine. We have this action payload, and yes, now we are everything is actually fine. Now so now the thing is we don't require these particular state variables. We don't require this use state thing. Nothing. It is not required anymore. It is not required because we are actually using Redux to actually handle all these kind of a thing. So do not worry about the state variables kind of a thing. So the state variables like this user loading error are actually present in this given slice. So in order to get the state variables, what we should be doing? We should be using import, I'll say use selector from the React Redux, and I just get the state values like from it. I'll say what are the state variables? Loading, loading space comma error comma user. So where we are actually getting it from? Use selector. So inside which I'll say I'm getting, actually it is from the store, so I'll mention it as store dot what is this particular thing? User state. So first this thing store, we need to update the store. Okay, we forget this step. We have created this slice, but we are again directly going to this given particular part. I just forget to the slice which we have created, we need to actually keep it in the store. So I just forget that particular step. I'm wrong. So I just go to the store.js. Where is store.js? Here we have our store.js. Now inside the store.js, I'll simply say import this user slice, where I need to have particular section for it. I'll say user state, where I'll say this user slice, that we are actually getting, I'll say reducer. So for which I need to place comma. User slice, I got it there. So this is the second step, which is nothing but I have created successfully this user slice thing, and after that I have created this user slice thing. I need to actually include it inside this given particular store. So we did it successfully. We did it. This included this user slice store or user slice section, or user slice is stored inside the user state. To be more precise, inside this user state, or stored inside the store with the name user state, which is nothing but in the store the component name is user state, which is nothing but if you go to this example of this shop or DMart in store where we have kitchen items is one such a label that is given to that entire section. Similarly, I am doing the same thing. Here. For this entire slice part, the name it should be having is user state. Similarly, for this entire slice part, the name it should having is counter state. So this is the thing that I have named it. My second step is also done. Coming to this third step, go back to this particular app.jsx, main.jsx to be more precise. Where is your main.jsx? This main.jsx. Okay, we have not included it. So for which I don't require this strict mode anymore. Because sometimes it works bizarrely. So I'm not at all interested. So in which I'll say I'll actually remove it, and I'll simply say this entire thing. Simply say I'll just keep it in it. So inside it I'll keep it. So in which way I'm getting this entire details for this app part using this store. I'm getting the things. So the third part, provider is actually also set. Close these things. And the other thing is we have this middleware. Where we have go to it. Where I'll say constant action user slice. So everything is fine, working good. Where we have this dispatch, try and catch, everything is working fine. And also we need to have actually we need to now go to this users reduce. Now we need to actually import it from app. So this entire thing we are getting is from app thing. The entire thing we are actually getting it from app. So that is the thing. So instead this particular thing and say user, not user, that entire thing I'm actually getting it from this given particular thing. This entire thing. So till this part is done. Now let's say what are the things that I missed? Nothing. Go to this part, have the counter thing available. So which is nothing but go to this app.jsx. Instead of having this counter, I'll simply say get this particular data of what is this element, user redux. Now check, it is actually getting loaded. Okay, I still need some things that need to be done, so don't worry about it. It is still loading. So everything, our application is actually fine, working fine. So for that, in order to do this extra stuff, I'll just go to my user reduxer. Here I'll say we have this loading here, the error part which is coming from this thing, and also this is coming from this entire thing. Anything, nothing. So for which let's say I have this particular thing, okay, because here this name and sort of this thing need to run. So I'll say apart from this use selector, I also get this use dispatch thing, where I'll say const dispatch. I'll say we call this use dispatch function. Yes, now we'll see how do we dispatch this, how do we utilize these actions here in the user redux component itself, for which I'll say I'll use my use effect still at this point of time, because I'll tell you the reason. So I'll say there is this function that actually takes place where it should actually happen one time, for which I'll tell this dispatch, where I'll say this fetch this what is this thing, fetch user middle way. is a function that I have written is a wrong. Nothing. Function spelling is wrong. Sorry, sir. My bad. So I'm using this use effect hook, which is nothing but once initial render happens. Once initial render happens, then I just want to ask middleware, hey middleware, I just want data for data at API. So for that, oh sorry. For that you have our fetch user middleware. Okay, I actually need to export it. Okay, by the way, I'm actually exporting. Documenting. Give me a minute. Let's connect it to this particular element itself. Just connect the element to it. There is no battery saver that is on. Everything is fine. Everything now is fine. We're actually exporting it, so no worries. Go to this user reducer. Now, if you observe, go back to the second diagram where our React component down here, our React component, once the initial render actually happened, then we immediately want to ask this middleware, hey middleware, get me the data. So that's why I have used this particular dispatch for this given particular middleware. So I need to import it first. So for which I'll say, I have imported it. Now go to it. Okay, any mistakes that we are actually making? Cannot read the properties of name. Go to the start. Okay, there are many errors. One single error, many error times. This is the what? Properties of undefined. Where I'll say, oh, this is the thing I just want to showcase. Road. Okay, there is some mistake I made, but there are still some things that are left. But till this point, everyone has any kind of doubt. So yes, we'll say loading. Anyone has any kind of a doubt? Because once after the initial render actually happens, this use effect actually calls this given particular function. Where inside this given particular function, we are actually asking this middleware, get me the data. That's what I'm asking. So till this point, anyone has any kind of a doubt? So I'm actually trying to complete this entire diagram bit by bit. I have created the slice, included it in the store, provided it, and from the application I'm getting the state variables from this given slice using use selector, and I'm in this currently at this given particular point. Now I'm using this use dispense to talk to this middleware. So I've completed this particular step. So anyone has any kind of a doubt till this point? I'm actually trying to follow that cycle. So whenever you are working with the Redux, try to have these small diagrams because it is very helpful for you in order to navigate. Okay, first I have did this thing, next I have to go to there, from that I have to go to there, from that I have to go to there. There is this process of cycle. Instead of doing all the things at once, when you are dealing with the Redux, the best thing or the best practice I follow is that have a neat diagram like this. Have a neat diagram and check this entire flow, because this is the entire flow. Once you check this entire flow, even if it is showing error, there is some mistakes. We can follow it later, but follow the process. So still anyone has any kind of a doubt? Can I go ahead? Did you import user Redux in app.jsx? Imported. I'll remove it, by the way. It's not required at this point of time. I'll comment it. Fine. The simple thing is loading cannot destructure the property loading undefined. Okay. Go to this thing, user Redux. Maybe this is the problem with it. So this might be the solution. Reloaded the page. See, there is this loading happens, but there is actually problem with getting the data from the backend. There is actually problem with the backend thing. Cannot read the name property, name, user redux, name. Go to this placeholder, JSON.placeholder, JSON.placeholder. It is actually name. It is actually the phone. Everything are same. Everything are same. But do not worry about it. When you are making this asynchronous thing, we need to actually use the thunk. We actually need to use the thunk. But at this point of time, till this point, if you have any kind of a doubt, we'll go ahead. Follow the process. It is very easy to understand React. If you just miss the process, you are gone. You are gone. I'm telling with my experience. Clear but confusing. Do not worry about. Do not worry about this thing. Following the cycle. I'm just following the cycle. Do not worry about it. Now, after this particular thing of changes that we made, I just want to install this particular thunk. Thunk is one such an. Wait a minute. I'll just show thunk. Redux thunk. How can I install it? So there is this thunk, writing logic with thunk. So what does this Redux? Okay, let's see what is the Google. Okay, it allows us to write action creators that returns a function instead of an action. It is a bit trickier. Don't worry about it. It is a programming, a piece of code that does some delayed work. Does some delayed work. So it is nothing but using thunk requires Redux thunk middleware. So in order to have a clear-cut communication between, which is nothing but I'll show it to you here, this middleware need to go out and talk to this API and get the data. So in order to have your middleware to talk to some other external world things, we require this package known as thunk, for which I need to install this thunk. So where is this thunk? What is this thing? I think npm, go back to Redux thunk install thunk npm install Redux thunk. Okay, we need to follow this particular thing. So go back. Oh, sorry. Go back. Create it. I'm clearly at it. cd Redux. Now I'll say npm I Redux dash thunk, not think, thunk. Install it. Installed successfully inside of our thing. So if you have any kind of a doubt whether it is installed or not, go to this package.json, check Redux thunk, React Redux thunk is installed. Now let's go back. Now in this middleware, because thunk is actually used in this middleware thing, so I just want to say that instead of this thing, dispatch is not enough, because this user slice I'm importing, it is actually getting this action objects. It's action object, so no need to use this dispatch thing. By this way, this dispatch is actually getting from this particular Redux itself. So at this point of time, every time when you write a middleware, we actually get dispatch from Redux. Just remember that. Please do not delve into this thing. Why we are actually having dispatch in the middleware itself? It is a black hole. If you just go into it, you are just lost. So at this point of time, for your experience level, do not think much about it. Now I need to import. I say I just want to import this thunk module. Thunk middleware. Thunk middleware. See, thunk middleware from this thing of React. Sorry, from Redux thunk. We need to import it. After thunk, after we get the thunk part, I'll simply say, or instead of keeping it here, let's make it more. Let's make things more thing. Go to your store. Go to this store. Store will be sufficient. This is a very ideal place to include thunk. Instead of having it inside the particular middleware itself, let's have it in the store itself, because store will take care of all the things. So I'll keep it here. I'll say thunk middleware. From which from the thing known as Redux thunk. Now I say, apart from this reducer, I'll say there is this another particular thing that we can mention in the store itself, which is nothing but a middleware. middleware, I'll say it is nothing but thunk middleware. So in the store itself, I'm mentioning that there is actually a middleware where we need to get the data from. Where we need to get the data from, for which I'm using this thunk middleware. Okay, okay. Now go back to your code and check. Okay, it's telling that node module redux thunk doesn't provide this export named default. Okay, where it is store.js4. Store.js4. Okay, did I made any kind of a mistake? Thunk middleware from redux thunk. Okay, this is correct. And configure store, we have our thing, and we'll say this thing is actually middleware. This thing is actually the middleware. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and let's see whether this is the problem with this thing or some other part. Go to your middleware. Now we need to actually make these changes. So till this point we are actually exporting it. It is an async function. We are actually getting this user.loading and sort of stuff. Now okay, the basic thing I haven't mentioned, that the user which we are getting from the API, just want to pass it as a parameter here. So if you remember this use data in slice, it is manipulating the state variable user, but it is waiting for this action part. So for that, in order to send that action part to this use data, go to this thing. No, not this thing. Go to this thing. Yes, I'm actually sending this given particular user, that is actually the data that is coming from the backend, and I'm sending it to this given particular thing. Now for this use data, this particular thing, user is actually known as action. So any things that we need to make changes here? Actions. Anything we need to make? This slice, where is user slice is actually being imported. User slice. I'm actually getting things. Wait. User slice. Check. You see that still there is no such kind of a thing. Default. Okay. Let me check whether we made any kind of spelling mistakes, because at this point of time what we have did, we just followed this entire thing. So until unless let me see whether this thing is actually working or not, whether I am able to get the data from the user or not. Where I'll say user, there is no such network call that is actually happening. Wait, this response.json, where I'll say this particular thing. Okay, this is actually not loading. Go to the store.js, because there is this problem here. Go to your Redux. It is actually running fine. Did I add any kind of mistake? Okay, nothing mistake. User state. Go to this thing where we have mentioned user state. The names are actually, so go to this main.jsx. We are getting the store, so don't worry about it. Okay, let's focus on this particular store part itself. We have this middleware, which is nothing but this thunk middleware. Okay, after this thunk middleware, I just check my user middleware. Are there any kind of mistakes? Anyone found? Clear but confusing also not. Oh, kick it. This is the user. I'm actually sending this data as user. This is also clear. Now Mm. Okay. Be getting the element, then we should be getting the element. Then what is this error? Uncaught syntax error. Let's go to it. Syntax error. What is this syntax error? You should be getting the data. The requested module doesn't provide an export name default. Oh, let's go to this given particular module and check this Redux thing. Redux thunk install. Go to this thing where we have this to do's. Reduce this particular thing. Configure store as we are on the store. Okay, import it. This apply middleware thunk inside the store. We are actually creating the store and we are actually applying this thing. The other way of doing it is get default middleware. Middleware though we are actually getting it. Why do I know this basic Redux store where we synchronize updates, dispatching this stuff? Okay, did we made any mistakes in the code? Made any kind of mistakes in the code itself? I think none. None is missed. Any doubt? This thing. Again, the syntax, uncaught syntax error. Doesn't provide an export name default. Thunk middleware. Go to this node modules thing. Go to this Redux component, normal component rules. Go to this thing. Go to this thunk. Where is this T? Redux thunk, to be more precise. Inside this Redux thunk, we have our source files. Index and distances. Redux thunk. Open it. This thunk middleware, we have this one component. Import type thunk middleware. Export type is thunk middleware. Okay, let's check whether we messed up this thing. Thunk middleware. It is the key value. Thunk middleware. Thunk middleware. Let's check it. Run the code. Again, it is showing me that it is not by default. I think there is a small thing. Till any value we need to provide. So export default fetch user middleware. This user middleware. Acha, thanks. Default. Still, I think export const by default we are actually saying export const. By the way, we actually write this particular middleware in this given particular pattern. Instead, go to here. I'll say Redux thunk installation. Go to this installation part. Redux thunk React Redux. So now let's check whether the entire code here. Go to this particular component. We have we have this Redux. Open this Redux component. Make sure you follow these instructions. Okay, it is no Redux itself. Actually exporting the store, and we are actually exporting the store and using it set this particular thing. Instead of named export, write as a default export. Okay. Default. Write default, or I'll simply say, instead of writing it as const, I'll simply say const. I'll simply say export default. This particular, what is this particular thing? Fetch user middleware. Now, still there are any kind of errors. Console. This mod modules redux.tongue.js does not provide an export named default. But I've installed tongue. But I've installed tongue here itself. Cat. No, not cat. Might be problem with this array or any other thing still. Or go to your app dot user reducer. Might be say written there. Again the same problem. Thing is the requested module which is nothing but okay. Store. Let's say search for this thunk middleware itself. Let's see whether we are making any kind of mistakes or there is kind of an update altogether. So sometimes it is both the ways. Thunk middleware. Okay, this is a question. Import thunk from not popped up something. My question. Depreciated, and what is the best practice to operate? Oh yeah, this is depreciated. Acha no. Connecting the store error message that it stays it's depreciated. Current behavior middle. Context. This is way back the thing. It's a default export. You can give import whatever variable name you want. These are equivalent. And it should work because it worked previously. Just 3 months back it worked. Okay, let me figure out this thing. Sorry, thunk middleware. Yes. I've checked it. I've checked that file. This is the thunk module file, thunk middleware file. Middleware, thunk middleware. See, this is thunk middleware. So we are actually returning this middleware. So export const create thunk middleware, or else let's see how can we create a thunk middleware. Or else thunk install. So what is this thing? All of a sudden there's this problem with this React is nothing but if something is got updated, it stops working. The previous thing will be depreciated and sort of stuff. So we need to be very careful. Redux toolkit. If you are using our official Redux toolkit package as recommended, then nothing to install. RTK's configure store already has thunk middleware by default. Actually, by default it has it. More details importing with thunk middleware. If you are using these modules, not using it by the way. To enable thunk, we apply. But we are not applying for thunk. We are actually applying middleware. So middleware, get default middleware. It is actually creating the functions and sort of stuff, but not required that much. Not required that much. But let's see, is there any single mistake that I made? Any single mistake? First, remove this thunk. Let's keep this thunk out of it. Or run the code. Go to this F12 and check what is this error. There's nothing but this thing. So this is a particular thing. So I'll say export here itself. Export here itself. I'll just remove it. I'm getting the data. I'm actually getting the data because one simple mistake I made is, as if you go to this particular thing, it is mentioned that this is a recent thing. I haven't checked this doc. By the way, I haven't checked this doc. So this is the recent update that that if you are using this official Redux toolkit package, because in yesterday's session we have included this particular rootkit package, right? Wait, this we have installed this thing, Redux install. Go to it, where we have this particular thing known as installation part, where we have included this particular thing, npm install redux/redux install react redux, and also we have included this particular thing known as Redux toolkit. We have used that two packages need to be installed into our code, but there is a small update that if we are using this kind of our official which is nothing but this npm's official Redux toolkit, which we have installed yesterday, there is nothing to install says to configure this API. Already it has React thunk middleware. By default it has this thunk middleware, but we have installed it, we have did all the unnecessary stuff all of a sudden, but there is a small change. Go here, go back. You're actually having this code. So close it, run the code. You'll see this is the code. Let's say here, where is my middleware.js? If I say this pass the value of person2, you'll see the person2 value will be appearing. Similarly, if I say send the value of person4, you'll see the values of person4 will be getting. So now we have successfully implemented this entire thing with this one single example, where we have created a particular asynchronous Redux component, where we are actually using or creating a middleware itself. We are going there and we are getting the things back. So anyone has any kind of doubt till this point. So because be very careful when you are working with the React, all of a sudden there might be some update and your application will be just gone. You need to again go to the documentation, read all the things, ask ChatGPT. Sometimes ChatGPT is also confused, because I have this very recent experience with this React application, because I've built it far back in 2021. So when I'm just trying to start that application, it is actually showing many errors. So I've debugged it, went to a lot of stuff, checked it, everything I have checked it, and finally I found out that there is an update. So I have just updated it. Even ChatGPT confused me a lot. Even Google confused me a lot. ChatGPT confused me a lot. So I just made this one simple update that is actually written in Stack Overflow. I just read that thing, got back to this file, updated the file, everything is sorted. So React might be a nightmare if you don't follow the updates. So yeah, that's it. I mean, like for this given particular thing, we have done our entire Redux thing for a asynchronous kind of thing. So in order to understand this component, we have this one component known as, let's have Redux dev tool. Let's open this dev tool itself, Redux dev tool. So where we have our the initial things. Where I'll say action part. Now I've done next action. 2 stack frames collapsed. This might be the view compiled. Trace tool can leave it. Difference in this particular thing. Now let's try to understand what exactly happens using this particular thing known as Redux Dev tool. Redux Dev tool. So the first thing is when we are actually about to start. When we are actually about to start, when we are actually about to start our entire thing, our entire application, this is the first thing, which is nothing but if you observe the state. If you observe the state, we have this user state. You have user state. Go to this particular slice where you have mentioned these three values and these three reducers. Now check at the starting point of the application, you have the state variables as null, user value as null, loading value as true, error as value of the false, right? Error value as false. Now, import of a no. We have this one thing. Now, if you go to this diff, you see that states are actually equal, but if you go to this particular thing known as action, we are at this initial position. We have this initial position of this particular thing, where I'll say plate. Okay. Okay, it is reset it, by the way. This is nothing but I'll just scroll this thing back to this initial point of thing where we have these two things that are actually taking place or having an option, user loading and user data. So if I go to the state, initially the state is actually having these values. Now after some time we're actually in this given particular slide where we have this particular thing known as jump. So if I click on jump, or at this given particular point of time, we are actually going to this this user loading thing, this user slice, and I'm going to this user loading thing, and I'm making sure this loading thing is actually equal to the value of true. Now if you observe the same thing in state also, you'll see the loading value is actually equal to the value of true. So which is nothing but if you go to user Redux and try to understand this entire flow of the Redux component, the first thing is once the initial render actually happens, we actually call this use effect hook. So this is the first step that we are actually making, right? Whenever this user Redux actually appear onto the screen, then the first thing or initial render we actually calling this use effect. Achha, use effect, call this or call to this particular fetch user middleware. Now in this particular user middleware, what it is actually doing is it is actually dispatching or calling this particular user loading function. So if you go to users slice, where we have in the user loading function where we make these state variables change, you see that thing is actually happening. After this, we go to this next step where at this point of time we are actually getting the data from the user, from the backend itself. So which is nothing but in the user, we are actually performing these three actions. Which is nothing but we are getting the data from backend, we are actually converting it to the normal format, and then we are actually calling this particular use data. This is nothing but here the use data is one such a state. Where we are actually making this loading variable, state variable false, and getting item, the payload or the data from the backend and storing it in the user variable. So check the same thing happens here. Go to this particular thing. If I am currently at this point of time where here this user loading is actually called, but after this step, if I go on to this particular step, given particular step, you will see that this user is having the data, is having the payload, this entire payload, and you see this loading value has turned as false because whenever we call this particular line, we are actually making this loading variable false, and then we are actually having the payload, that is actually the data inside this given particular state variable. That thing actually happens. And after this, when I go to this particular step, I just make sure, perform these actions. This payload is an action. I'm just actually performing using this particular thing. And finally, I am at this given particular stage. Or at the end stage, I can say, where I'm actually user loading thing actually happens and renders, or it just go off, and our state variable will be will be conformed to this one single value of payload. And finally, after reloading successfully, we are at this point. So at each and every step, you can observe what is that one single thing that actually happens. what is that one single thing that actually happens in entire Redux component using this thing known as Redux dev tool. Using this thing known as Redux dev tool. So for which is Redux dev tool, I'll remove it. Well, Redux dev tool. So what are things that is happening inside the Redux? We can actually see them using this Redux dev tool. So please do add it into your Chrome and wait a minute. Everything is fine. Hide slider. So just try to figure out what are the things that are exactly present here in the Redux dev tool, because it's actually useful when you are working with the Redux. So yeah. Now there is this one simple thing I just want to teach, which is nothing but I'll say this one single thing. Shall I tell you now or the thing? Okay, this might. Okay, we'll see it tomorrow because it's already been 2 hours. Okay, fine. It's already been 2 hours. So yeah, that's it for this session. And yeah, if you have any kind of a doubt, you can ask me. I'll be available for next 5 minutes. So I'll say git status, git add, git commit. I'll say implemented Redux, async Redux to be more precise. Async Redux. Implemented async Redux. This is the git commit message. And finally we push to the master. Everything got pushed successfully. Now your code is actually please send the GitHub link. Okay. So close it. By the way, we don't require this thing because this session has been ended. Go to this React sprint. Come to the code. Go to this, copy it, close it. I'll send the link here. So if you have any kind of a doubt, you can ask me. Otherwise, good night, bye bye, and tomorrow we'll meet you in the session. So goodbye and bye bye. Tomorrow is the last session of the sprint. Do not miss it. Tomorrow we're going to see what are the real implications of this Redux into our application, and finally we make few changes, then deploy. Simple. Tomorrow might be a longer session. And also if you're comfortable having tomorrow session by tomorrow morning itself, that would be pretty easy for me because I can also have some rest tomorrow night. So tomorrow morning, if we can have any kind of a class for at least 2 to 2.5 hours, we are done with the sprint. So if anyone has any kind of a doubt, you can ask me. Vissel sir, no doubt, congratulations. So yeah, in which way I'll close it. Anyone has any kind of a doubt? Please respond. If you have no doubt, just tell me goodbye and good night. Actually, I'm having 6 people in the code. Okay, that's it for this given session. Bye bye. We'll meet you tomorrow. Tomorrow is the last day of the thing, so do not miss it. So I'll say this one single thing. I'll say in podcast.